Well, we were working in a company that was a medical company serving healthcare, and I had a role facing customers, and I started seeing that customers weren't always getting the information that they needed. And we felt that it was important to provide information to customers, and yet customers' needs are not always what manufacturers are set up to meet. They're in the business of selling equipment and making money, and what we found was that there was a great deal of information that customers were starved for, and we really got excited about trying to provide that information. We had this idea that we could make some money. We had this sense that we were offering enough value that we should get some money back that would exceed what we were getting in our previous company. And that was a motivator, no doubt about it. I'd say the number one lesson is patience and persistence. There's certainly stress in any new company, but it takes a long time to do anything meaningful, with very few exceptions out there. Most companies take 10, 15, 20 years to make a difference. In 1984, there was this little obscure software company that announced this new product line to meet the needs of some kind of obscure business users who had these graphic needs and so on and so forth. And they released their very first version of that software, but they really didn't release the first usable version of the software until 1993, nearly 10 years later. And one can argue it took several years more before it became even really friendly. Windows, Microsoft. It was 8 years old before they even came out with that product, and now they've grown it into something entirely different. That level of patience and persistence through criticism, through hard times, is the key. So when something that seems tragic or crisis-oriented happens, I'm able to look back, and Jeff is the same way. We're able to say, okay, this is okay. It's going to be fine, because we know from experience that these things work themselves out, and they become little blips in the past, and that allows us to cope with the stress much more easily. Well, the key is, it seems hokey to say, but the key is to be true to yourself at all times, always, even if that means walking away. Not all businesses are going to succeed. To trust intuition. It's very easy for us to especially us men, to be compelled to not trust intuition, and yet it's a key part of managing very complex situations, because there's so much going on in human interactions in a young company where everything's new. There's not an established culture, and so the only way to really put all those pieces together and manage it is to trust that intuition, and to be consistent in how you apply yourself to the company.
The genesis of Neoforma was really through just finding out that there were terrible inefficiencies in healthcare and the supply chain. It was finding all the products to go in a medical room was just a real effort, and Wayne and I were in the middle of that effort at Varian. We realized there was probably a better way to do things. It was that simple, and we kind of set our minds to what that better way might be. Varian certainly had the opportunity to pursue it, but I think rightfully so. Varian realized its business, they were very focused at a very specific business in healthcare, and what Wayne and I were interested in doing was something that was very different than what that business for Varian was. So I think good management at Varian saw that this is something interesting. It's something unique. It's something not in our core area. Probably needs to be developed, and these two individuals seem to have a passion for it. Maybe we can help them start it, get it going. At the same time, it's probably something that doesn't live here in this company. And I think that was Tim Girton. Is just a very sharp guy, and wanted to liked seeing things change, liked seeing healthcare improved, and just made the right decision. I think that's really the way it happened. With Atania, we've done a couple things differently. One, we found those investors that think very much like us, go out and focus on the customer and focus on real value, and that's all you need to do. And they're folks that have done this before. They're angel investors. Some are angels that have become venture capitalists as well, but they really understand that that's such an important piece in growing a company that's going to last. You know, that focus on the need of the customer. I think that's different. We were very distracted at times with Neoforma, and with Atania there's no distraction. Everything, including our investors, are focused all in the same place. So that's something that we learned that's very important.
The reason I came on board at Neoforma was, first and foremost, I knew the market opportunity was real. We had a healthcare supply chain that was broken, that was inefficient, and it had been something I'd been working in for years. At the same time, you had the internet, which was white hot. It was a chance to come to Silicon Valley and really be right in the center of the universe from all the web-based and internet-based initiatives going on. So it was a good fit. The market opportunity was real. There was a lot of excitement, and those things added up to a good opportunity for me. There was also a lot of capital involved, a lot of money being invested in Neoforma and in other companies in the segment. So it just seemed like a good time to do it. Well, looking back over the past 7 years, we had very high highs and very low lows. And what I'm most proud of are really a couple of things. One, that we are one of the surviving companies. Out of that initial 100 at the starting line, there are only a couple of us left, and that feels really good. Secondly, it's the same group of people that are here that have built the business day in, day out, and have stayed through the good times and the bad. We're a really resilient team, and what I found is that tough times really bond a team together, and so we really have a closeness. What's neat and what's happened now is that they've actually restarted that business and yet another startup. And they're going after that same initial market they went at before, albeit with more advanced tools, etc. So I give them high marks for being very selfless and letting us come in and change the direction of the company. 2, I think it was the right thing to do. But 3, they didn't give up on their dream, and they're back at it. My experience at Neoforma was definitely worth it. I would encourage anybody out there who's thinking about starting something or getting involved in an entrepreneurial effort to do it. You have high highs, low lows, you work really hard, but boy is it a lot of fun, and it's really rewarding. So it's definitely worth it, and I'd encourage anybody who's thinking about it to take the plunge. Give it a try.
I had decided at some point that I wanted to start my own company, and it turned out that it was a good timing because my husband, who had 25 years of engineering experience, I guess 20 years at the time of engineering experience, decided that he wanted to leave his firm, and so we wanted to start an up-and-coming technology company that was customer-based and with cutting-edge technology. And so we started Galatia on July 2nd, 1996. And so we started it and launched it and got our first customer within the first month, and it was just an exciting time and a wonderful time. I would excite the client, not just Wayne, but other people as well, by basically pushing the technological barriers. I really do push the barriers of the technology, and I inspire creative thinking about solutions and such. And I think that's why we worked very well together, because we brainstormed together what the next possible move was, what the next possibility was.
You need about 30 seconds of context to understand that I came from a firm that was small and grew very rapidly. The law firm was like a group of New Yorkers. I'm an ex-New Yorker, and I was lawyer number 11, and they grew to 150 while I was there, and were often declining entrepreneurs, and I left because I felt they weren't allowing people like Wayne and Jeff to get started. And there's a story where they even declined Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak initially as, hey, why would we invest in them? They have a name of a company called Apple for a computer company. How is that ever going to succeed? And it was such the wrong intuition. We started this firm with a view that we would be tightly hooked to entrepreneurs. You want people who are sane and sober. Believe me, some folks come in and they're wacky and not necessarily completely sober. You want people who are smart, as in intellectually smart, and savvy, as in street smart. So sane and sober, smart and savvy, sincere and sensitive, sort of understood that you as an investor deserve to get a return. They were going to be fair with you. They weren't going to be thinking of you as just someone who provides money and then you won't hear from us again. the traditional entrepreneurship model, and what I believe and I buy into in a very significant way, is you eat beans. When we started this law firm, I remember having very little savings, and I remember thinking, I'm going to tap every bit of equity in my home. I had been at the large firm and was basically, they were announced, you're going to be partner in the firm next year. And I said, I hate to tell you, but I'm leaving and I'm not accepting the partnership. And they said, how could you do that? And I said, because I'm going to start my own place with a slant towards being more aligned with entrepreneurs than with venture capitalists. I see venture capital myself as more of commodity money, and really the idea creators, the intellectual capitalists, as the entrepreneurs. I'd rather be aligned with them throughout the entire life cycle, even at the point when the company gets sold and you shift from maybe representing the company to representing them against folks who are helping the company get to a liquidity event. So my view of life is you eat beans and you suffer, and you accept the fact that your wealth is going to be consolidated in the firm you're creating. It's the ultimate incentive for saving money, for stretching money, for recognizing that each negotiation with each new employee is a serious one, where you have to explain to them, we are so committed to this business succeeding and its equity being worth some money, that you should really consider a 25% pay cut, because we've already taken a 70% pay cut, because your stock's going to have so much inherent value. If you don't do that, and certainly in the top of the internet market and maybe even now, there's sort of this more, hey, I expect to get market salary and the stock is just an add-on, and it doesn't have the same motivational force. The motivational force is staying up till 4 in the morning to get the next revision of the product done. Answering the customer call as though, hey, if we don't answer it, we're going to lose a lot of goodwill. You can't replace that motivation very easily with just dollars. You have to have something more significant. It has to be an ownership stake. I think that's actually what creates new companies, that force of people being so hooked to the risk of success or failure that they're willing to bet everything. Yes, there are many legal ways in which you can hedge risk. I think both Jeff and Wayne showed a lot of entrepreneurship by not only putting their own dollars in, but I think one of them or both of them had their father-in-law, their mother-in-law, or relatives. I mean, that's even doubly risky, because the responsibility for a relative's money tends to really be backbreaking compared to just losing your own. So I credited them. I gave them more credibility as a result of that. I like to bet on people. I actually think ideas morph, change. Intel had 3 or 4 at-bats before they finally got the micro. They almost went bankrupt before they finally got to the point of saying we're really a microprocessor business. I think lots of companies really have to take 3 or 4 shots at an opportunity space before they get it right, and they end up morphing and morphing and morphing the idea with customer feedback to finally get what is it that the market needs that's not being supplied that will generate the goodwill that will sustain this business. And so ultimately you need people who can lead a group through that opportunity, through that space, that, you know, selecting the right opportunity to execute on. And so when you see those people, when you see that they're really committed, when you see that they see there's something here that is not being addressed by the existing suppliers that we can amass the expertise to do, that's when you make the bet.
In the case of Wayne and Jeff, the idea was very interesting to me because I had already had some experience in trying to figure out costs associated with doing certain hospital procedures, particularly coronary artery bypass procedures, because my background is a cardiac surgeon. And I knew when I first met them, that they were on the right track in terms of trying to rationalize this process, which I knew from my own experience was completely irrational. We had, this was about the time in the late 90s when contracting became a big deal, particularly for surgeons. And so we had a hospital in the South Bay near San Jose who said, you know, we'd like you to do our surgery. How much would it cost? So I went to the hospital and said, well, you know, what does it cost to do a case? said, well, you know, Medicare pays us blah, 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 and we have a certain percent. I said, no, I want to know what it costs, the actual cost to a case. And what I learned, of course, and they were just like everybody else, there was no cost accounting at all. And so a colleague of mine got together 10 records, and we went through every single line item. I don't know if you've ever seen after a 7-day hospital stay, it was, you know, it's like you get a hernia just lifting the record. And we went through every item and determined what the cost was. And what we found out was that the cost of doing a case was really a very small percentage of what they were actually charging. And not only that, in the process, we realized we could save a lot of money by doing certain things, by removing certain things that weren't being used very much, and also by bundling certain things with different bundlers. So by the time we were done, not only did we learn how much it cost to do a case, but also that there was a lot of leverage available that the hospitals weren't using, either because they were lazy, most likely, or because they were ignorant, probably as likely, or didn't care because from their point of view, if their costs went up, they would just go to the payers and say, well, next year our budget's going to rise by 20%, so guess what, raise your premiums. So when they came along, the idea was really great, but their approach to it was completely wacko. You know, they were producing CDs, which they were going to distribute at intervals to their customers. And why the internet wasn't a part of their strategy, I mean, granted this was the 90s and it wasn't quite as obvious as it is here in 2006, but it seemed to me that if you could put this kind of thing on the internet so you could do instantaneous changes to pricing and that kind of thing, then you really have something. And so that's basically where I came from. I originally rejected the idea. So I met them with Sean McLaren, who I don't know if you've come across here in this process, but I said, you know, come back when you have an internet strategy. And that's where it all started with these guys. So in this case, the people were last. If I put the people first, like I do now, I don't know if I would have actually gotten involved in this, because although I have a great fondness for both these guys, they were so different in their approach, and they were so seemingly incompatible that my reaction would have been, I'm not sure I want to do this. This doesn't look like the right team.
For entrepreneurs, I think you got to keep in mind there's many paths to success, and there's a lot more paths to failure. But you know, the big path to failure is when you got the money, is not spending it wisely. You just got to be thrifty and frugal all the way. And when you raise money, you have to be absolutely honest with your investors. I mean, I've seen companies for 4 or 5 years, we'll have monthly board meetings, and we'll have reports of all of the excellent progress and the good things that are happening all the way up to the board meeting where the company goes into bankruptcy. And that's simply because people aren't honest with the investors. When you're raising money, you create positive expectations, and you just got to be realistic. And if the things aren't happening, then you got to take appropriate action, not just pretend that things are going well when they're not. I think that's probably the biggest mistake.
The one thing about Neoforma that was the case from the beginning was it's never been the kind of place that was just a workplace. We put in a lot of hours in the beginning. It was not unusual for us to work 14-hour days, 7 days a week, 3 or 4 months in a row. You don't do that if there's not more to it than just being at work. So there's a culture of almost family involved at the office. My dog lived at the office for the first 3 or 4 months. It was that kind of thing. They started with a vision that ultimately became very different than what the industry wanted the vision to be. And when you start something, you have to make difficult decisions along the way. There was a point in time where they had to let go of the vision of the company. And that was the single most difficult part, I think, for each of them. It's a difficult thing to let go of something like the engineering process, but it's much more difficult to let go of where the company's going and what it really stands for and what it's going to achieve. I would do Neoforma again. I would do it in a minute again. I would do something like it if the team felt if it felt right, if the founders and the people, the key components of it felt like it did in the early days. I'm a sucker for that one. I'd dive in with both feet again. I'm the kind of person who looks for that kind of thing. Now, it's not for everyone. It's certainly not for people who, in that phase of it, are concerned about the other parts of their life. But if there's a part of your life you're willing to sacrifice and you're willing to put aside for a few years, it's certainly something I think I would do all over again. You simply can't put in that kind of effort over that period of time and only do it for the money. It just doesn't work. I think you break down if you try and do that.
He was always an awkward fit at Varian from the very beginning when he talks about trying to make things better and, hey, why accept the status quo that just because something was done this way for years to continue. I was surprised he stayed as long as he did because it was not who he was to be at a company like Varian for very long. Was it worth it? Oh yeah. The opportunity to realize a dream and a vision, yeah, I think that's worth it. At that time, people did not think this is an idea that potentially could be connected to the internet. I mean, remember that you didn't have huge catalogs of things, business to business wasn't out there yet. So you could not search for things as easily as you can now. So that really was not prevalent. I mean, that hit after Neoforma was founded, and that's what took off with the VCs. Before that, it was Jeff and Wayne with this great idea. Hey, we have this great idea. They would have been happy for Varian to develop it. But once they had this idea, I mean, you know, they're both, here's how they're alike. They both think they know everything, and why shouldn't everybody listen to them and go ahead and do this? They know what to do. So that's great energy to go ahead and get something done. And I remember the original projections was like, we have this idea for this product, and we think we could sell enough that maybe one day we could make $1 million. And I remember thinking, woo, $1 million, that'd be cool. And that would just be sales. That wouldn't be your salary. So I think they wanted to make money, but not, we have this internet idea. They didn't know about IPOs and hundreds of millions of dollars. It was, let's go make the world a better place and try and make money at the same time. I think the downturn in the market really conspired against Wayne trying to grow his architectural planning tool. If the economy had not taken a downturn, then he might very well have stayed there and grown that. And that was an idea he loved. So he couldn't quite let go of that idea. Even though I warned him, please don't start another company, he couldn't resist that. So that was his baby. That was the original germ of the idea way back at Varian, was to help architects build better facilities and make it more efficient and make healthcare more cost effective. Thank goodness Atania is still doing well, doing great. And Wayne's back running that, and you know, that's his original baby. I think he wants to see that succeed.
What's important to me for values of people is loyalty. I've been around here at Neoforma, and believe me, I've questioned myself many days, why am I still here? I kind of lost the passion. As Wayne started losing the control of the company, I started, personally, my own feelings started to waver, and I didn't know where I wanted to be. But the underlying thing was that I was loyal to Neoforma. Those first 2 years, besides my marriage, was probably the best time of my life.